Hey everyone, Miss Dempsey here. This is an updated lap guide for Nurburgring 24h with the Toyota GR Supra Racing concept, and since it takes so long to complete a lap, I'm going to quickly go through the video and stop it less often, but anyways, let's get this started. Look for a path that is on the left as you will start to brake before it ends. You want to give yourself just enough space to be able to nail this first apex, as there's a little dip and it'll help you get the car rotated a bit more. Try to get really close to the apexes over here, then straighten the car out before you start to fully accelerate. Then for this next turn, look for a piece of track on the right as you'll start to brake right when it ends. Trail brake your way to the left side of the track, then brake when the curb on the left ends, and just try to be really careful with the throttle and start to fully accelerate once your car is straightened out. When the curb on the left starts, the gray curb that is, that's where you will start to brake. You want to try to prevent the car from sliding too much, as you'll see over here, and you want to be really careful with the throttle as it's really easy to accelerate too early and potentially cause the car to lose control. Then once you're about to hit the left apex over here, that's where you just ease off the throttle, then you can continue going back to full throttle. Then just after the grass on the right ends, you will start to brake. Try to really take advantage of this apex over here. Then you want to trail brake a little bit early just so you can get a nice angle and start to fully accelerate, as this is a high speed section right here. Your next braking point is before you reach the 50-meter mark. You want to be nice and slow through here, so slow down for the first apex and then you can start to speed it up for the next apex. Try not to take too much advantage of the curves, as you can get penalized here. Brake a little early and go for a late apex. Start to fully accelerate when your car is stabilized. Then brake right after the pit wall on the right ends, and then just once again be very careful on the throttle as you are now going downhill. Look for the sign on the left, as that's your turning point, and just ease off the throttle. Then you want to look for this patch of dirt that is on the right, and I have a highlight right here, as that will be your braking point. Brake as much as you can over here, and try not to touch the grass over here, as you can easily go off track here. Apply quick bursts of braking through these two turns over here, and then for this next turn, start to brake when the tarmac starts to change color. Try not to take too much advantage of the right curb, as there's a little bump that can really unsettle your car. Once again, just be very careful with the throttle once you start to fully accelerate. Right after this top of the hill, there's a little dip. That's where you will start to brake, and you'll be braking for just a tiny bit of a moment, and you will be using just a little bit of braking, just to slow you down just a little bit to be able to make that next turn. Look for the last white sign on the right, as you'll just ease off the throttle and start to turn in at a point. Then, when the curb on the left is just about to end, that's where you'll start to brake. Brake in a straight line as much as you can, and then once you hit the apex, you can slowly get back on the throttle. Once again, you're starting to go downhill, so you want to be a bit careful on the throttle and don't go full throttle too early. Now this is one of those tricky turns. Look for the white sign on the right, as you will start to brake before you pass it. Try to really nail this apex, but don't hit too much of it, as your car will end up going airborne. Then brake early for these turns, and then brake before you pass the crosswalk right here. And then after that, you want to bring yourself to the left, be careful on the throttle, then bring yourself to the right, and once again, be careful on the throttle. You will be trail braking through this turn, so just use a little bit of braking, and then right after you pass the writing that is on the ground right here, that's where you will start to brake. This turn goes in a bit more, so you want to be a bit more careful with the throttle. Look for the last white sign on the left, as that's where you will start to brake. Try to go for a late apex over here again before you start to fully accelerate. Then for this chicane, you just want to ease off of the throttle and then continue on. Then look for the curb on the right, as you will start to brake before you pass it. There are 3 quote-unquote apexes, and you will start to accelerate when you hit the second one. Then you need to brake nice and early for this turn. Brake a little earlier than where I do over here, as I end up triggering a slide. You want to make sure you don't slide over here. Just try to get a very nice and clean turn. Then you can short shift through here to maintain stability on the car that you are using. And then before the curb on the right ends, that's where you start to brake. Then before the curb on the left ends, that's where you also start to brake, and be very careful on the throttle as it's a rough surface and you can easily lose control of your car up here. Look for the Yokohama sign that is on the right, as you will start to brake well before you pass it. Brake hard in a straight line and then start to turn in. When your car is about to be parallel with both curves on both sides, that's when you can start to fully accelerate. Alright, going to speed up the clip over here just to save us a little bit of time. And then look for the gray curb on the right as you will start to brake before it ends. You'll be using just a tiny bit of trail braking, as you don't need to slow down too much. And once you hit the apex, that's when you can start to fully accelerate once again. This turn right here can be taken flat out, but then before the curb on the left starts, that's where you start to brake. Be very careful on this turn right here, as it's easy to overshoot it. Then look for the last happy little tree that is on the left, as you will start to brake as you pass it. Try to bring yourself into the carousel and then use a bit of throttle to maintain your speed. Once your car is pointing towards the next section, that's when you can start to fully accelerate. Take this first turn at full throttle, but then when the curb on the right starts, that's where you start to brake. Then you'll be easing out the throttle for this turn, and then you will start to brake just after you pass the track officials that are on the right. And you want to be a bit careful over here, as it's also easy to lose control. Be easy on the throttle. Then for this right-hander, just ease off on the throttle, and then start to brake a bit for this next turn right here. Brake a bit more if necessary, and then brake before the curb on the left ends. Be easy on the throttle for this turn, and then before you pass the Yokohama sign that is on the right, that's where you also start to brake. Brake at full power for just a moment, then go to trail braking. Then slowly accelerate, and then start to brake before the gray curb on the left ends. This turn is a little tricky, as it's easy to get the car to slide over here. Don't go too wide into the curb, as you can get a track penalty. Then before the curb on the left ends, start to brake, and be very careful when you're on the surface on the left, as there's not as much grip. Then brake early for this turn, and it goes in a bit more, so you want to be a bit more patient with the time to accelerate. For this turn, I suggest starting to brake just before your car makes a jump. You'll have enough time to react and get the car to make the turn. And you want to ease off the throttle over here, as there's a little jump and it's just enough to get the car to understeer, as you see me do over here. Look for the digital flag that is on the right, as you will start to brake just after you pass it. Brake hard for a moment and then trail brake and bring yourself to the right, and then you will start to brake more before the gray curb on the right ends. This turn is a bit more drawn out, so be patient with the throttle. Then brake early, because you want to get yourself into the mini carousel, and then start to accelerate when your car is pointing straight. Then brake before the curb on the left ends, and then just be very patient with the throttle, especially on this turn right here, as it'll lead you to a very long straight. Once we hit the new sector, I will go ahead and start to speed up the clip. For the final two turns, you will start to brake before the curb on the right ends. You want to brake right here to make sure you have just enough space to work with and not end up hitting the wall. And just after you hit the apex, just be very careful on the throttle and be very careful on the final turn, and you are good to go. Let's go ahead and complete the lap, and then we will talk about the strategy for this race. This race happens to be a daily C race, where the fuel consumption is a ×5 and the tire wear is a ×7. You don't need to worry about the tires, but you do need to worry about the fuel. It is possible to no stop this race, but you will need to short shift, and if you want to go the extra mile, do some fuel mapping adjustments. So for example, in this section right here of the Nordschleife track, you don't need all the power, so you can go onto fuel map 3 or even 4. Then for this section over here, I know I need all the power I can get, so I go on fuel map 1. There is another section where you don't need all the power, and I'll highlight that, and for that section, which should be coming up right now, I go fuel map 3 or 4. Once again, this part of the track doesn't need all the power from the car, so I can easily just adjust the fuel mapping. That way I can conserve a little bit more fuel and not worry about running out of fuel at the end of the race. However, let's say you're right behind someone and you're in a fast part of the track, you can also adjust your fuel mapping because you're going faster than them, you're catching up to them, so you don't need that much power, especially if you don't want to attempt an overtake, so like right here. So I just go into fuel map 6 because I don't want to attempt an overtake, I just want to stay right behind them and save a bit more fuel. And before I go on, I just want to give a shout out to Tyrannosaurus Rex just because he's an awesome person. But anyways, the other thing is that you want to be really careful. You want to basically have an error-free race, as I make an error right here, and because of that, that actually ended up costing me the race, as I could have caught up to first place, potentially attempt an overtake and potentially win the race. But because I made a mistake, it was big enough to guarantee the win for first place, and yeah, you just want to be very careful. So to summarize this, don't worry about tires, short shift and adjust the fuel mapping to save fuel to last the entire race, and don't forget to say hello to Tyrannosaurus Rex because he's an awesome person. But anyways, that is all for the guide. I hope you found it useful. Non-commentary versions are coming up, but this is Mr. MCA wishing you a good race, and I'll see you in the next video.